Okay, so hi everyone, thank you very much for coming. Today I'm going to be presenting joint work with Carman and Neustaedter on robotic telepresence at scale. And so to make sure we're all on the same page, let's first talk about what I mean by robotic telepresence. So robotic telepresence was originally developed to help people to communicate across distances as an alternative to being physically present. Similar to video conferencing, these systems often have a live video stream where the remote user appears on the screen, as you can see here on the left. And they also have a camera so that they can see what's going on. But unlike video conferencing, these remote users have the ability to drive the system around in the local user's environment. The picture here shows the Beam, which is a commercial telepresence robot, which you can also see in the audience here. And so these are the systems that we use for our study. So throughout the talk, I'll be referring to three types of users. The first is the remote user. So this is the person who's appearing on the screen, and they're also the person with the ability to drive the robot around. There's also the local user, and this is someone who's in the same physical space as the robot, and they're actively engaging with the remote user. And the last is the bystander. So although these users may be physically located with the robot, they're not actually actively engaged with the remote user. Now, having introduced these telepresence systems, I will say that this is not the first time that these robots have appeared in research settings. In fact, there are studies exploring their use in a wide variety of contexts, including medical, educational, work, and recreational settings. However, these studies have generally controlled the scope of the work in a number of ways, such as limiting the numbers of people who are interacting with each other, so the remote and local user only, having them take place in small environments, environment sizes, limiting the distance between the remote and local user, often having them in the same building, and having users interact across a limited set of activities, so usually one or two. In our study, however, what we wanted to do was explore what happens when you scale up a number of different factors. And there's sort of a question of why is this important? Why are we doing this? Well, it's important because although controlled settings can be great for understanding how various dimensions affect interactions, when you make things bigger and more complex, this can often reveal new behaviors and insights that may not be apparent in those smaller settings. So what we did was we conducted a study. What we did was we conducted a study at SIGCHI last year, where we increased the scale on 5 different dimensions. So to give you just a few examples, previous studies have generally limited interactions to one-on-ones with remote and local users, with a few going up to a larger number and one going up to around 800 local users, remote users, and bystanders. In contrast, at SIGCHI last year, there were over 3,700 people of local, remote, and bystander type users. Also, in general, these past studies have limited the ratio of systems to remote users. So generally, they've had a dedicated system for remote users. In our study, we had 33 different users that were sharing 10 systems over a period of 6 days. Prior work has also usually limited the number of activities that the remote user and local user are engaging in. So usually this is about 1 to 2. It's ranged up to 8 in one study. In contrast, SIGCHI, with its variety of activities, such as focus groups, interactivity, poster sessions, workshops, coffee breaks, parallel tracks, courses, and more, offers a total of approximately 23. Additionally, in prior work, the only channel for interaction is usually through these telepresence robots, whereas at SIGCHI last year, some of the sessions, like the plenaries, did offer alternate options, so they didn't necessarily need to log into the robotic telepresence unit. Instead, they could, for example, watch a live stream. So for full details on all of the factors that we manipulated, feel free to look at the paper. So with all this talk of scaling things up, what did we actually do? To start off, we rented 10 beams, as I mentioned before, which are commercial telepresence systems, and remote users were given a training session by the beam rental company so that they could gain some proficiency in driving the robot around. In addition, we also offered a practice race course so that users could sort of hone their driving skills and address these issues of concerns about colliding with other people. We also provided remote users with a map of the venue, and the circled parts here show where the docking stations were. So these docking stations served as sort of a drop-off and pickup point for the robots as people finished their shift, and we basically instructed them, when you're done with the robot, please drive it back to these docking stations. We also tried some of the suggestions from future work sections in telepresence literature. So for example, prior studies have suggested that having some level of customization for telepresence robots is important so that remote users are more easily identifiable, not just from the front, and also that remote users may feel a sense of identification with the system or a sense of ownership about the system. So to test this, we tried identifying systems with a unique color, and we basically attached a flag so that it was visible 360 degrees, and we identified those robots by color on the sign-up sheet so that remote users would know which system they were signing into or signed up for. Finally, given the scale of the event, we obviously weren't able to keep a track of everybody at all times. So we collected data in a number of different ways. So we had pre-conference surveys and interviews. We had daily surveys during the conference. We also had field notes, field observations, and 2 focus groups during the conference. We also had a Skype back channel. So this is something that was always on during the conference where remote users could IM each other and also IM the organizers as well as the student volunteers who were on shift to help them out if they got stuck or needed help. We also collected data through 3 questions in the post-CHI attendee survey. So what did we find? So I'll be showing a collection of insights and themes from our study, and you can find the rest in our full paper. So I'm just going to play a video right here, which will hopefully load. Here we go. So similar to prior work, we found that there was a significant novelty effect and local disruption. Oops. We'll see if this video plays. So basically what would happen if the video plays is this is a remote user who's trying to get to a particular location, and they're getting stopped not only by this group right here, but so they're getting stopped not just by this group right here, but they're also getting intercepted by other attendees who are running up to flag them down to take selfies or photos. So obviously this is a little bit of a distraction. Similar to prior work, remote users also faced challenges with disorientation and navigation in trying to sort of get through or get to places in a physical location that they had not actually been to. If you'll remember, we had also customized each robot with a unique color based on prior research, suggesting that this would be helpful for both remote and local users. However, we found that no remote users reported considering the color when choosing a system. Instead, although some people had no preference for choosing a system, the highest priority factor was location, by far and away. Additionally, prior work has stressed that one of the unique advantages of these telepresence systems is the ability to opportunistically interact with other people. However, what we found was that remote participants de-emphasized opportunistic interactions in favor of getting to places early. So for example, I want to get somewhere before the talk starts. I want to get there early so I can actually get into a good spot, but I couldn't because I kept getting stopped by people who wanted to take selfies. So basically, we view this prioritization as sort of like a telepresence hierarchy of needs, particularly where utility, particularly reaching a destination early, was of higher priority than personalization, opportunistic interactions, and other factors that have been cited in prior research. We also observed participants engaging in strategies and workarounds, such as system hopping or trying to coordinate system swaps, so basically looking for someone who was on the correct floor that they wanted to go to and trying to trade systems with them. One of the most prevalent strategies that we observed was this strategy of pre-positioning. So on the left, you can see a remote person trying to get into a talk and being unable to get in. And so unlike being there in person, because of the limitations of the system, it meant that they couldn't see the slides through people, and also it was very difficult for them to hear the speaker. Additionally, the crowded space made it difficult for them to maneuver because of concerns about colliding with people. And so this strategy of pre-positioning, where remote users would try to park the system where they want to access it later, became sort of a norm. And so I want to go to part 1 and 2 of UI Design and Agile later this PM. Can I just leave the beam in the room during the break? I am in CT, so I will need to eat dinner and feed the baby, so 40 minutes is already cutting it close. So what I'd like to point out here is that unlike being there in person where you might try to get there early for a crowded talk, these remote users were also balancing system constraints as well as the demands of their local environment and their conference needs. So this pre-positioning resulted in a lot of breakdowns. So for example, users ended up being unintentional eavesdroppers. So I was in a digital civics thing. I put the paper up to block the camera because they were walking away. And as soon as I put this thing on, I was sitting at some table, and I think it was this person actually, and he said, "Oh yeah, let's unplug her." And then there was another woman there, and she kicked me. Not hard, but lightly, and she said, "Yeah, unplug her." And I was like, what the hell is going on? So as remote users would get to the location and block the camera or walk away, they wouldn't necessarily be visible on the screen. And so it was not always apparent to local users and bystanders that that remote person could still hear them, resulting in this unintentional eavesdropping. Because we had 33 participants sharing 10 systems, with people trying to pre-position themselves, this also resulted in scheduling collisions. So basically, they were told to return the robot to the dock when they were done, but because of overlaps, they weren't able to do that because they'd stay till the end of the talk. So this resulted in, for example, I used dark blue a few minutes ago. I'm sorry, I can't go back to the dock in time. I didn't reserve the beam for the current session, so I just signed off, leaving it in the hallway. Please use this beam if you want. So somewhat predictably, this also led to a breakdown in shared system disorientation where users would log in and not know where they were. Especially if this was their first time logging into the system and they weren't very familiar with the conference venue. So for example, I found a beam in an elevator, does it belong to someone? Or, hey, did you just leave brown somewhere? I beamed in, but it's not at a dock, not sure where I am. Another insight that's been observed but not well documented in field studies was the incidence of pranking and abuse. So for example, 4 times in one day, a guy would step on my beam to stop it from moving and then titter amongst his friends. Does that mean that, does that tell us that they're not seeing us as a person, or that it's more okay to be bullied when telepresence is involved? So not only did we see these incidents of pranking and abuse, because of the duration of our study, we actually witnessed that this harassment increased over time. So for example, I also noticed that attendees were less patient with me today than on other days. Again, I got the impression I was an annoyance and inconvenience, which is not a great feeling when trying to participate in a conference. And people seem to feel today that it was okay to push my beam around and in general act as if I was a piece of furniture rather than an attendee. So in addition to these instances of harassment when remote users were using the robot, we also observed cases of vandalism for unoccupied robots, where someone ripped the antenna and flag off of a robot, and also later a research group defaced all of the robots with stickers of their lab. Finally, past studies have reported remote user concerns about running into obstacles or remote users colliding into objects. While our remote users reported concerns about hitting people, none of them reported awareness of any collisions. However, in the post-CHI survey, we had 10 local attendees report being hit or run over by a robot. So this really highlights a mismatch in awareness about what's actually going on when people are using the systems. So what are some of the design implications of these findings? First, most telepresence systems do provide cameras so that the remote user is able to navigate in the local environment. In fact, the cameras on the beam system, which are actually some of the best on the market for these telepresence robots. However, despite this, we still had a mismatch in awareness of people, remote users not knowing that they had hit people and actually colliding with people. So this suggests that just providing cameras is insufficient, particularly in large-scale contexts where the stakes are much higher and you might run into others. Future systems may benefit from the addition of sensors, extra sensors, warning systems, and navigational aids. Second, the workaround of pre-positioning in our study highlighted that the binary state of on and off may not provide enough granularity and awareness of the remote user state. Future research may explore alternatives or ways of equalizing awareness between remote users, local users, and bystanders. For example, a light or visual indicator if the remote user is able to hear what's going on around them, but is not visible. And finally, the prioritization and strategies that we observed raise questions about whether robotic telepresence is the right solution for large-scale venues or activities. We would suggest that more research should be done to better understand when investing in alternate technologies, such as live streams and wall displays, may become more worthwhile. If there are cases where alternate technologies are a better fit, are there ways to allow remote users to smoothly transition between technologies. So for example, if somebody wants to attend a talk, but then they want to talk to the presenter after the talk, allowing them to transition from live stream to robot so they can come up and ask a question, and then continue on to the coffee break in a seamless way. So our study extended prior work by increasing the scale along 5 dimensions, revealing new insights, workarounds, and breakdowns that had not previously been observed in in smaller, more controlled studies. Our results point to a need to consider and explore how findings from prior work evolve when applied to larger contexts. And also our results highlight new design considerations for robotic telepresence as these systems become a more common way of attending these large-scale events. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'll take some questions.